Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stephen Dwyer, and on behalf of everyone here at Civision, it's my pleasure to welcome you to what's coming next in Hyper-V. Now, Simon's going to share with us a lot of great information, and some of you might have questions about. So if you have any questions at all during the course of the webinar, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A window, and we'll get to them at the very end. Now, everyone at Civision is very pleased that Symon Perriman has kindly agreed to present today's webinar for us. If you don't know Symon already, he's an author and a contributor to technical books, a Duke University graduate with degrees in both computer science and economics, a Microsoft employee since 2006, a world traveler, and most relevant for all of us today, a Hyper-V expert. So with that said, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Symon.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you to Civision for having me here. Now, for everybody that's joined today, what we're going to really be taking a look at is what's coming in our next version of Hyper-V. Now, as you guys know, Windows Server 2012 R2 has been around for a while, and so we're going to be talking about what's coming in the next version of Windows Server. And many of these new technologies and features have just been announced at the latest TechCade, so you're going to get a bit of a preview to see what's going to be coming down the line. But first of all, I want to spend a minute kind of talking about Microsoft's cloud vision and where virtualization fits in within this cloud story. Now, Microsoft, we come with the advantage that we're enabling our customers to be able to run their virtual machines across different clouds. One of our biggest investments over the last couple of years has been to try to build a consistent platform. And when we talk about consistency across clouds, we're not just talking about your private cloud that runs in your data center, but being able to run those same applications and virtual machines on a cloud that's being run by a hoster somewhere within your own country, or running up on Microsoft Azure, Microsoft's own public cloud within our own data centers. And this is a unique value proposition that Microsoft has, that consistency of our experience. And this isn't just for our virtualization admins, where you can build one VM, have it run across all of these clouds, but this is also for our developers as well. They get to build one application. It runs across those same clouds. For our systems management people, using Operations Manager, they can monitor across all of these different clouds. And you're going to see in a little bit how we're going to take a look at Cloud Reporter from Civision and see how that gives you even better insight into Hyper-V as well. For identity, we have Active Directory up in Azure and on-premise. They connect, so single sign-on across these clouds. Our database administrators also get that same consistent experience. So ultimately, what that means for you as the customer is you get to build an application once. You get to use whatever cloud you need when you need it. If you need data that needs to remain in your own data center, you can do that. If you need to suddenly scale out your website to the public cloud because you're running a new promotion or you're suddenly reaching the important sales time of the year, you can do that as well. What we're really trying to do is enable this hybrid cloud, being able to connect your different applications and virtual machines and use whatever resource you need when you need it. Now, as we've looked at Azure, we've been running some of the world's largest cloud services. Things such as Outlook.com with over 300 million mailboxes. Even Xbox Live has 40 million active users. And all of these massive scalable services we've run, we've then built these technologies into Azure. And with this release, we're now pushing these technologies down into Windows Server and System Center. So this means with our next release of these technologies, you're not getting brand new, unproven technologies. You're getting new capabilities that have actually been tested in Microsoft's own data centers for several years, ensuring that it really does meet your enterprise need and enterprise scale. What we're really going to focus on now for the rest of the presentation is taking a look how we're investing in virtualization in the next release. Now, as we kind of think about infrastructure, regardless of whether you're talking about compute capacity, storage management, or network management, we find that there's really three common planes of data that gets passed. Well, first plane we have is our data plane. This is where we actually get to go and send information across the different servers. It's where our different applications are running. And so in the compute world, we really try to think about our virtual machines. Now, they get managed as a single logical group, this middle tier that we call our control tier. And then at the very top, we actually have our management tier, where we allow our end users to be able to go and provision and understand different types of applications. Now, this doesn't just live in the compute around virtual machines, but we have the same consistent experience as we look at our networking stack and our storage stack between our management plane, our control plane, which is essentially the brains of the operation, and then our data plane, the actual end services or end applications that our customers use. And so what you're going to find is, with this release, a lot of our investment around virtualization isn't just around the core computing capabilities of running virtual machines, but it's really extending this logic and best practices to virtualizing our networks and virtualizing our storage, with ultimately the goal is being able to provide a software-defined data center, where we're able to use computer code and software to manage every part, whether that's our servers or our network or our storage devices. Let's take a look at our compute in a little more detail and see some of the investments that we're making around Hyper-V in this area. Now, as I mentioned, we really have tried to design this to be enterprise-grade. We feel that if we can run 300 million users on these technologies, we think that most of our customers are going to be able to scale up to meet their own needs as well. And so we're continuing to support the industry's leading scale as far as the number of virtual CPUs, the amount of memory per machine, the size of the clusters, and 8,000 virtual machines running on each cluster. Another strength that Microsoft has is our tight integration with enterprise workloads. Microsoft has the benefit of having shared engineering teams that work on virtualization. We have shared management that covers both SQL Server and SharePoint and all of these other technologies. And so what this means is when all of the different teams are designing their technologies, the latest version of SQL or Exchange or SharePoint or Link, we get to work directly with our own Hyper-V engineering teams to ensure it is optimized and runs as well as possible. Now, we've also been working with many other enterprise partners as well, such as Oracle and SAP, making sure that they have a first-class experience running on Hyper-V. And in fact, Hyper-V is the only hypervisor that Oracle supports other than their own. You can't go and run Oracle databases on other virtualization solutions and have it be supported. Now, we've also been working with a lot of our hardware vendors as well, taking advantage of capabilities built in the latest version of hardware that enhances the virtualization experience. One of these examples is RDMA, or Remote Direct Memory Access. Essentially, this allows the particular networking card to do kernel-level processing. And so what this means is when you're trying to do things such as a live migration, move virtual machines between different hosts, we can actually have the hardware perform additional tasks. Now, this means that it's going to offload tasks that need to be done by the host itself. So more resources can be allocated to the virtual machine, and fewer resources have to be allocated to things such as processing network traffic. So you'll see us continue to work with all of the major hardware vendors to take advantage of different type of offload capabilities. Now, in this release as well, we've also added a lot more capabilities to be able to edit virtual machines while they're running with no downtime. In this release, you're going to be able to hot add memory and remove it so that you can reallocate static memory on a virtual machine with no downtime. We'll be able to add and remove networking devices. And we're going to continue to be able to support the ability to add and remove storage devices, something that we have in our current release. We're going to continue to enhance failover clustering, make sure that we have even tighter integration with Hyper-V, and try to minimize the number of different interfaces you have to go to complete a task. And we're going to continue to have the best guest clustering story in the market. Now, guest clustering is where you actually provide high availability within the virtual machines themselves. So I will take two virtual machines. I would install Windows Server within those VMs in the guest operating system and create an entirely virtualized cluster. This gives us the ability to do failover between virtual machines or restart applications running within the VM. So if you need to do patching or updating for your virtualized SQL database, this gives you an even higher availability story running entirely within the virtual layer. And we have no limitations on guest clusters. We support 64-node guest clusters. We support live migration of guest clusters, dynamic memory of guest clusters. So really trying to ensure that our virtualized cluster story is as strong as our physical cluster story. Now, Microsoft is going to be accelerating the speed that we release future updates. Now, in the past, we've kind of gone on this 3-year, 1.5-year release cycle where every major release happens 3 years, minor releases happen every 1 to 2 years. But we've realized that our whole world is really turning more towards a service-oriented world where services are constantly being updated. People are expecting updates more frequently. And so we're going to be gradually moving towards that model, providing more frequent updates. Now with that, we wanted to ensure that customers wouldn't be impacted by that if we sped up the velocity of our development cycle. So from our last release and moving forward, we're going to be supporting rolling upgrades. And so essentially what this means is you can go and upgrade your physical fabric, all of the underlying hardware, with zero downtime for your virtual machines. And we do this by allowing you to live migrate to the next version of Windows Server. Now, this has been enhanced from our previous release. What we had to do between 2012 and 2012 R2, if we wanted to do a migration between different versions, was have our old cluster, the 2012, set up a brand new cluster running 2012 R2, and then we'd do a live migration to the newer version. But the limitation that we had with that approach was it actually required setting up 2 different clusters. And the newer cluster would have a different name than the old cluster because they had to be online at the same time. So we heard customer feedback and they said, you know what, instead of having to do 2 clusters and live migrate between different versions, we want to be able to support a single cluster with mixed modes, meaning that within this single cluster, I can have multiple versions of the operating system. And we've now done that with this release. Let's take a quick look at a demo here, and we'll see some of this in action. So what I'm going to do here is log on to my Windows Server vNext. I'm currently using Failover Cluster Manager, which is what we go and use to manage our Hyper-V clusters. And from here, I've gone and I've taken down one of my nodes. This is currently the node that I'm logged on to. We can see that it currently has a different name. Right now, I'm currently logged onto Symon P, Server Technical Preview. So I've essentially taken this node out of the cluster and upgraded it. And what we're now able to do is go and add this upgraded node back to my original cluster, allowing us to provide this mixed mode cluster. And again, what this will allow us to do is simply live migrate my VMs to the upgraded cluster nodes, and one at a time go and upgrade my physical infrastructure. This is going to be something that we are going to continue to support for all future versions of Windows Server as well. So as Microsoft continues to go and update, you'll see that we're going to continue to support this rolling migration so that you'll never have to take your VMs down as you upgrade the fabric. And this is going to take a couple minutes to complete. We're not going to wait. But as you could see, I now have this mixed mode cluster. I have the technical preview merged with my Windows Server 2012 R2. Next thing we wanted to focus on here as well was trying to enhance some of our management. Now, when we really try to think about using Hyper-V, Hyper-V by itself is great, but what we really try to encourage customers to do is leverage System Center Virtual Machine Manager, because SCVMM allows us to really try to centralize the management. If you have lots of hosts, if you want to do load balancing between them, take advantage of a single centralized management solution, we definitely want to encourage you to check out Virtual Machine Manager. Now, once we have Virtual Machine Manager in place, it allows us to really do some high-level automation, some tasks that are often very repetitive, very time-consuming. So, for example, using VMM, we can do end-to-end host deployment. We can do end-to-end cluster deployment. We can do end-to-end file server deployment straight from bare metal. So essentially what this means is you go and purchase a new rack, you go plug it in with redundant internet connections, redundant power supplies, turn it on, and from that point on, we will start communicating with its baseboard management controller, the BMC component of that server, and we'll go give it an IP address. We'll go connect it to our Pixie server. We will install an operating system on it. We will go and join it to the domain. We will enable the Hyper-V role, the failover clustering feature, and we can even go build that cluster for you. So we're really trying to streamline this deployment operation for our customers, as we're seeing a lot of them trying to rapidly scale out, especially in the hoster environment. We also have some improved monitoring in this release, where you get insight into your physical and virtual infrastructure. But what we provide by Virtual Machine Manager, in all honesty, is still very limited. If you're really trying to take advantage and really understand how your Hyper-V hosts are working, the performance, the efficiency, that's when using a partner solution like Civision's Cloud Reporter is really going to give you a lot more insight, a lot more visibility, and a lot more planning capabilities in how you can really take advantage of your infrastructure and optimize it. We've made improvements around our protection as well, improving how we do backup of all types of virtual machines and applications. And we're going to be continuing to support multiple hypervisors as well, including Hyper-V and, of course, VMware. So this means that using this single interface, you can go monitor your vCenter environment, your ESX,
and essentially do day-to-day operations from a single console. As far as core Hyper-V enhancements go, we've made several here that are really designed to provide better security and reliability. Now, the first thing that we've done is update our service
model. Now, this means that in a hosted environment, our end users, our tenants, the people that are actually using the virtual machines themselves, they're going to have more control about how and when they upgrade their own components within the VM. Now, the most important one that we're looking at here is what we call the integration services. These are binaries that live within the virtual machine that basically allow it to interact with the hypervisor, the physical host. It allows it to do things such as manage memory for dynamic memory, do live migration, add and remove resources with no downtime, and then just basic operations such as shutting down the operating system, restarting it, things like that. Now, in the past, the guest user, the tenant, hasn't been able to control these integration services themselves unless they manually go to a hotfix site, they manually go download the article, they manually go and install these updates. But they need a lot of guidance to do that. What we've done in this release is we've now integrated all of our upgrading directly through Windows Update. So this means that when your end user, your tenant, goes to Windows Update, they have their maintenance window, they're going to go and install their patches anyway, they're going to see all of these integration service updates come through this exact same channel, so that we're enabling them to be more self-sufficient, be able to update their integration services when they need, when they can have downtime. The second big improvement we've made is around updating the virtual machines themselves. Now, to provide a little insight, each version of Hyper-V in its configuration file, it has a version number for that VM. Now, one challenge we had with the 2012 R2 release was that we updated the version. I believe it was from 5 to 6. However, however, the version 6 VMs that you built on 2012 R2, they weren't compatible on earlier versions. And so this caused some trouble where we had customers who had the latest version, 2012 R2, they were creating VMs on it, but then when they tried to move those VMs back to a 2012 host, it just wouldn't start. And this is just because we didn't really communicate well about the importance of these version numbers. So what we've done with this release is by default, when you create a new virtual machine on vNext, it's still going to use the old version number. This means that this virtual machine is going to be compatible with the older versions of Hyper-V until you manually go and switch it and manually tell that virtual machine to go update to the next version. Once you've gone and manually updated that VM to the next version, it's going to go and light up all of the latest features. So this is essentially designed to give our customers more flexibility when they run their VMs as they're gradually updating their fabric. The third enhancement we've made is around the configuration file for the VM itself. Now, in the past, the configuration file, it was written in plain text, and this included metadata information for the VM, such as the name of the VM, the amount of memory it needed, the storage connections it had, network connections, that type of thing that basically defined how that virtual machine looked. Well, what we've done in this release is we've now encrypted this file. The reason for this was that manual editing of that plain text XML file was not supported. So we would see customers go in and make changes to that file, but the problem was when that VM moved to a different host, those changes were never copied. because it was being edited in an unsupported fashion. So what we've done here is we've essentially locked up this configuration file to avoid people from manually editing it and getting in a bad situation where they make changes that aren't globally applied. This way, when people make changes the formal way, we'll make sure we capture those changes and replicate them as necessary so that the VM will maintain its new settings when it's moved to different hosts. The next one that we've added are production checkpoints. Now let me actually switch back over to my demo to kind of show you what these are before I talk about them. So I'm now logged into a different host running vNext, and on this host I've already got a couple of virtual machines running. Over here I have my client VMs. In the bottom I have some Linux virtual machines, and then in my left here I have a Windows Server vNext virtual machine. And you guys, there's a lot of other features in here. I'm not going to spend time talking about it, but you get some nice things back like the start menu. Things that, people have requested for a while, we've heard, we're now bringing back in this release. So let me jump back to my Hyper-V host again. And what we can do is we'll go take a look at the properties of one of my vNext virtual machines. So I'm going to take a look at the settings here. And down here on the left, you're going to see a whole new set of settings for what we call checkpoint. So let's spend a minute talking about checkpoints here. Now, what checkpoints is it's basically taking the run-in memory from a virtual machine and saving it to a disk. So if you have an 8 gigabyte virtual machine and you save that to a disk, you're going to be saving 8 gigabytes of data to that disk. Now, well, checkpoints have always been used for what we call dev and test, not for production. And the reason for this is when we're copying that data and saving it to the disk, we are literally just dumping the active memory. We're not ensuring that that data is consistent or complete. And so this means that if you go and restore that information, it will probably work, but it's not guaranteed to work. So let's say, for example, I have a SQL database that I'm taking a checkpoint of. Well, the challenge we'd have is if there were things still in the file system buffer that hadn't been flushed out, if you had pending connections, if you had customers connecting with different IP addresses, sometimes we would not be able to restore that information correctly because the client's IP address may have changed, some of the data was no longer there in the file system buffer. So this caused problems being able to use these checkpoints in the real world in production. So what we've done with this release is now we've added this support for production checkpoints. This is now on by default, and now every time we create a checkpoint, we actually call the agent, the VSS agent, that goes and ensures that that checkpoint is complete. And so it's going to go and do all those things such as close active connections, flush out the file system buffer, make sure that there aren't any pending transactions, so that we have a complete capture of all of the active data. This way, when we restore, we're guaranteed that we haven't lost any information. So hopefully a really powerful enhancement here with this release. Final thing that we've done around management for Hyper-V is being able to improve remote management support. We now connect using a different protocol. We can connect to our VMs on host through IP addresses, and so it just simplifies the deployment and management of different virtual machines. Now, as we start to think about Linux as well, we've really tried to invest in this technology a lot as a company. In fact, we hired several dozen of the top Linux developers in the world, brought them to Microsoft, and they're actively writing Linux code for Hyper-V and for Windows Server to make sure that it integrates even better. One example is the integration services for Hyper-V, and again, those are the things that allow the VM to, run well on a hypervisor. Those integration services are now directly checked into the Linux kernel. And so this means that most of the latest Linux distributions, regardless of, whether you're using Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, whoever, most of the latest Linux distributions are now enlightened when they're first deployed. This means Hyper-V knows how to dynamically manage their memory. It knows how to live migrate. It can hot add CPU. It can hot add storage. It could go and do these standard virtual machine management operations that you would expect on our Linux virtual machines. We essentially treat them now as first-class citizens. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about some of our investments that we've made around virtualized in our networks. Now, as we look at our management plane, we still see that we have our provisioning and operations, how our end users interact. As we go and look at our control plane, we've now introduced a new role into Windows Server known as the network controller role. So this means when you go and install, your different features, different roles in Windows Server, you're now going to see this brand new one for the network. And we'll talk a little more about that in a minute, what that does. Finally, on our data plane, this is where we actually deploy our virtual networks and send the information between our different servers. So taking a look at how we're really trying to improve our network virtualization. Well, one of the biggest areas of investment around networking is working with our hardware vendors. I mentioned earlier we looked at RDMA, being able to do memory processing offload within the network adapter. But we also have CPU processing offload through things such as the TCP IP offload feature. We could make advantage of being able to dynamically spread data across different memory cores as well. We've improved integration with NIC teaming across all of our different adapters, continuing to work with all the hardware vendors so we can team everything. And then we even wanted to go and extend our support for different types of network virtualization protocols. Now, Microsoft, we've decided to support the NVGRE protocol, which is an encapsulation protocol that you'll see used if you use Virtual Machine Manager. We, of course, have customers running multiple hypervisors. We want to support them as well. And VMware supports both the STT protocol from an acquisition of Nicira a couple of years ago, but they've kind of got rid of that, and now they're really focused on their own protocol known as VXLAN. What we've decided to do with this new role is we're going to support all of these protocols. We don't want to have a protocol war. We don't want to have our customers setting up different networks and thinking that there's no interoperability now, have the VMware network stack, have the Hyper-V network stack. We want to eliminate all of that protocol battle. And so what we're now working on is being able to use our technology to manage all of these different protocols. So you can go to a single location, regardless of what your existing investments are, continue to use it as well. Now, this biggest enhancement I mentioned earlier was this new role of the network controller. Now, essentially, what we wanted to do here is provide a centralized brain for all of our networking infrastructure so that our end users can go to a single location, and from here, they could go and look at all of the networks. They could go and understand the health of their networking components. They can manage those components, get data from them, do monitoring, do analysis, understand what needs updating, what needs patching, and then they can go and actually provision virtualized networking resources. So you could kind of think of this similar to something like Hyper-V Manager, where Hyper-V Manager centrally controls all of your virtualization components. This new network controller role is going to centrally manage all of your networking components as well. And you're going to see one of the other big investments in this area is that we're going to be releasing even more NFVs in this release. Now, an NFV, or Network Function Virtualization, is basically a virtualized hardware component. So as we look at traditional data centers, you would have a physical firewall, a physical load balancer, a physical router, a physical switch, a physical gateway. What we're now doing is we are virtualizing those physical components and allowing you to automatically deploy and configure them through this network controller role. Now, by being able to virtualize these physical hardware components, you have the benefit of instant scalability. If you need to go and add a new load balancer, you don't need to go purchase one, ship it, install it, and rack it. You just say, I want a new load balancer, and we'll deploy it inside the VM, and we'll configure it so that it's connected to all of your different networks as well. We're making sure that everything is done using standards as well. We have monitoring built in so we can understand the health of those networks, and we've even improved the visibility of the physical networks for our VM guests if they need it. And so what this means is if I'm a tenant, I'm using my virtual machine, and I see a bunch of virtual network adapters, in the past, it was really hard for me to figure out what adapter went where. How did I map those back to the underlying hardware? Well, what we can do now is if we turn on this feature, based on security settings, of course, we can now allow our tenant to see the name of the physical network adapter on the host so that they can make sure that they're connecting their guest network adapters. To the right, physical host adapters. Now, we've also wanted to improve performance here, so we've actually introduced a brand new load balancer in this release, a new SLB role, Software Load Balancer. So this is even more scalable than Windows Server Network Load Balancing. NLB is still included in this release, but we are actively encouraging our customers to consider using this new Software Load Balancer as an inbox solution for load balancing. And this is another technology that was built for Azure. It's been proven in Azure for several years and now finally introduced directly into Windows Server. We have the concept of a distributed firewall, so you can create a firewall and apply those changes across your entire data center. We now are going to support service chaining. And service chaining essentially allows you to create a traffic flow for end users. So let's say you have somebody connecting over the public internet. We want to first make sure they go through a VPN, then through a firewall, then through a gateway, then to a different server. We can design that traffic flow and enforce it so that those customers get connected to the correct networking resources in the correct order. We, of course, support our Linux-based network appliances, and we continue to enhance our traffic management as well. Now, when we go and introduce System Center, this gives us that centralized view again, being able to go and make sure that we can see all the information about our physical and our virtual switches from a single location. Finally, we're going to talk about storage and how we're trying to really enhance our storage virtualization story as well. Now, in our past release, Windows Server 2012, this is where we first made an attempt to have software-defined storage. And we really did this by providing pooled storage with a technology known as storage spaces. What storage spaces does is it allows us to take commodity hardware, let's just say 1 terabyte disks, and create a pool of them. So let's say I have a dozen 1 terabyte disks, and I want to go create a pool of storage. Well, we can take those 12 disks, put them in a pool, we have some failover, we have some mirroring, we have a hot add disk in reserve, and maybe that gives me 10 terabytes of data. Well, the advantage that we have now is we don't see this as 10 or 12 1 terabyte disks. We now see this as a pool of 10 terabytes that I can carve out how I need. So if I want to have one virtual disk that's 8 terabytes large, I can do that. If I want to have 20 disks that reach 100 megabytes, I can do that. So this is that flexibility of being able to pool our storage in a single location. Now, the next big investment we made is by introducing tiering for these pools. So we found customers, they're going to have some fast storage like SSDs. They're going to have traditional storage, spinning hard disks. And there may be even some older storage that they're going to use for backup or archive. Well, we now have inbox capabilities to go and analyze how frequently your data gets accessed and move it between those different tiers. So the data that you want to access very frequently is going to be on your fast tier, your SSDs. When you stop accessing it frequently, we'll automatically move it to the medium tier or to the slow tier. This way, you get ensured that you can access the fastest data as soon as you need it. So you could kind of think of this similar as RAM in a regular computer. Data that we want to access regularly and frequently, we go put in RAM. Data that we access less often, we go push back to the disk. So kind of same concept here. Now, we've also had deduplication built in for a while, which finds duplicate files and basically eliminates those duplicates, freeing up a lot of storage cost. We've continued to improve our support of the new file system, REFS, Resilient File System, so that it has built-in error checking, things like that. And one of the other new enhancements that we've announced in this release is clusters that use only direct attached storage. So this means that you can create a failover cluster without having to use any type of shared storage. It uses only DAS storage. And essentially what we do is we create a storage space, we create a three-way mirror so that that data is replicated to 2 other hosts at any point in time. And using this inbox solution, we can significantly reduce the cost of clusters now without any dependency on shared storage. We've also tried to improve our resource management and resource allocation. So we have quality of service or QoS. And we actually introduced QoS a while ago. Quad allows you to provide a minimum guaranteed amount of storage I/O and prevents a single VM from consuming more than a maximum amount of I/O. So it basically throttles the disk I/O for a particular VM. Now, as I said, we had this in the last release, but what we've done in this release is enhanced it further so that we can now create global policies and say that all of the virtual machines and all of the disks need to fit within this threshold and apply it globally. And as new VMs come online or as people add new disks to their virtual machine, that policy will automatically get applied to those new disks as well. We also wanted to improve our work with our inbox replication solution. Now, in our past release, we introduced a technology known as Hyper-V Replica. And Hyper-V Replica essentially will take that virtual hard disk of a VM and go and copy it to a different location every 30 seconds, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes, basically providing a easy inbox disaster recovery solution. Now, the problem with that solution was it did replication asynchronously, which meant that every 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, it would perform that copy. But if you had a crash between those times, that could potentially be data loss. So what we've introduced in this release is inbox synchronous replication. This means that when a write happens to the first site, it's immediately copied to the second site, and it's not committed until the second site sends an acknowledgement back. Only when both sites have that identical copy of data will both sites commit it. This ensures that there is no data loss in a disaster recovery solution. So now all of this is going to be available in box. And we support all different types of storage volumes. We support clusters, scale-out file servers, SMB3, NEFS, REFS. So everything that we try to run our applications on is going to be supported with this new inbox storage replication. Now we centralize this management using Virtual Machine Manager. We're trying to make it even easier to provision the storage, to manage your SANs, and to monitor them as well. Now, as I wrap it up, hopefully that gave you a very fast but pretty broad view of kind of the investments that we've been making here. And again, we're now not just looking at virtualization about managing your virtual machines, the compute capacity. We're really looking at it being able to virtualize your storage and virtualize your networks as well, giving you this concept of the private cloud with having pooled resources, ongoing monitoring, automation, and being able to dynamically scale and adjust resources as you need. Again, I want to remind you that this is really possible with the Microsoft Cloud Platform because we are taking these best practices from Azure and now building them into Windows Server while still giving you the flexibility to move your virtual machines and your applications across these different platforms. Now, with all of this monitoring in place, or all of this virtualization in place, one of the next big investments that you need to be thinking about is how to go monitor this environment, make sure that it's reliable, resilient, and also some best practices around how you can plan for the future. And so with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Stephen, and he's going to be talking about how Symon Cloud Reporter can help you get that best return on investment from your private cloud.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was a lot of good information, and I know there are a lot of questions we're going to be answering. But yeah, as Simon said, we're just going to take a couple minutes and talk about Cloud Reporter. I was talking the other day to an IT administrator who had a massive Hyper-V infrastructure, and he said running Hyper-V is like driving a Formula One car with a blindfold on. You've got a lot of power at your hands, but you don't have as much visibility as you'd really like. So that's where Cloud Reporter comes into play. Actually, when Symon designed this product, it was originally custom designed for one of the largest financial service providers in the US. So we got their real-world experience, their real-world requirements, and we turned around and commercialized that so everyone else can take advantage of the product as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through some of the scenarios and the use cases that Cloud Reporter could help you in your own Hyper-V environment as well. So just sliding on to the next slide, we're going to first talk about some of the task-based reports that we have in Cloud Reporter. So you've all heard of virtual machine sprawl, and especially in self-serve environments. You have people who will create a virtual machine, they'll use it for a while, and then they'll forget to turn it off. My analogy there is sort of like having children. They'll go into the room, they'll turn the lights on. When they're done, they'll never turn the lights off again, driving up the power bill. Hyper-V, you've got the same thing. All these virtual machines running, using up your resources, memory, sometimes some CPU, and they're not really doing anything. So one of the task-based reports in Cloud Reporter is to identify your idle virtual machines. So we'll go out, we'll scan through everything that you have, and we'll tell you the ones that aren't actually running or doing anything, and give you the opportunity to power them off and free up those resources. Same sort of thing, especially against self-serve, if you have developers running amok on your environment. I'm a developer, I'm allowed to say that sort of thing. A lot of developers and organizations will spin up a virtual machine, and then they'll start using it for critical workloads. And they don't tell anyone. And you're not able then to bring that virtual machine under the Virtualize System Center Operations Manager. It's just running this critical workload by itself, no one's watching it. So one of the other task-based reports in Cloud Reporter, we'll go through, we'll tell you every single virtual machine you have that's not being monitored by System Center Operations Manager. So then you can sort of do a risk analysis and say, are these virtual machines that we need to bring into monitoring as well? Moving to the next slide, Symon talked a little bit about the ability now to on the fly to change some of the resource allocations within your virtual machines. And one of the things we do in Cloud Reporter is we recommend when it's time to actually do that. So we've got a whole bunch of right-sizing reports. So we'll look at virtual machines that are demanding more memory than you've actually made available to them, and then you have the opportunity to increase it. On the other side, we'll look at virtual machines and we'll tell you which ones are actually asking for less than you've allocated to them. And again, right on the fly, you can take that memory right out of them and use them for other virtual machines in your clusters. Same thing for processing power. We'll tell you which virtual machines we think, based on their current processor usage, could benefit from additional processors. Then moving along, we also have a bunch of reports that really give you visibility into what you have in your virtualized environment. So we'll tell you how many clusters you have, host, more importantly, how many virtual machines you have out there running, and what virtualization density you've achieved. And that's again a great metric to share with your CEO if you're trying, or the CFO as well, if you're trying to show what a great job you've done migrating to the private cloud and freeing up physical servers. As well, we're going to give you alerts when you're getting close to the threshold for some of your critical resources, like compute, like storage as well. So you can see here the sample report. We've got 2 clusters that can be facing memory exhaustion. All the reports in Cloud Reporter are click-throughable, so we click through right to that into the memory report, and we can see exactly when those clusters are going to run out. So we've got one that actually has free memory available, but is below the failover requirement. So we're going to notify that we're out of memory right now. Then we've got another machine that's going to run out of memory sometime in the future, or at least it was in the future when we made this slide. And of course the final cluster is never going to run out because we're actually freeing up memory on a daily basis. Then moving on to the next slide, one of the big things we have in Cloud Reporter is capacity planning. So you can look at the historical usage of your resources like compute, network, and storage, and that can give you an idea of the future. But like they say in mutual funds, past performance is no real indication of what's going to happen. Sometimes there are events that you know are going to happen that can't be predicted. For example, you might be taking hosts out for maintenance. You might be launching a brand new application and you might expect a lot of load. You might be fortunate and you've gotten some extra budget and you're bringing new hosts and clusters online. So what Cloud Reporter lets you do is model out those scenarios. So we've got actually a user interface built right into System Center Operations Manager where you can model out all those scenarios, adding and removing hosts, adding and removing load. And as well, you can base it on the current loads that you have. So we give you ideas of what's small, medium load in your environment. And then you can say, I'm going to add more of that type of load. And then what we do is you run a scenario report. You can pick and choose all the different scenarios you configured, and we will tell you how your virtualized environment is going to respond under those different scenarios. And this is a great report if you're sitting down with the CFO or the accounting people trying to negotiate for new hardware or new budget. You can tell them exactly under what scenarios you're going to be able to manage the resources and under which scenarios you're going to have a problem. So it's really using your past performance, enhancing it with what you know is going to happen in the future, and then coming out with a good plan for capacity planning. And then just moving on to the next slide, it's just a quick overview of all the reports that we have in Cloud Reporter. I've just touched on a few of them. And again, this is a little overwhelming list, but they're all clickable, click through from one to the next. So you can go from the overview to memory resources, to look at the cluster, to look at the hosts in those clusters, to look at individual VMs. All just click right through, go from the problems right at the top, and see what the causes are right at the bottom. Just trying to make your life easier. How have we implemented Cloud Reporter? Just on the next slide, we talk a little bit that it's only thing you need to install is a set of Operations Manager management packs. Now we report on both Hyper-V and VMware, and we do it all through just management packs. You don't need to install external services, you don't need to install other applications elsewhere. It's just straight management packs. All of the reports will show you the VMware and the Hyper-V data at the same time in the same format. So the idea is that you no longer have to silo your virtualization efforts if you're running hybrid scenarios. You can see everything for your cloud in one place. Now, if you are in a siloed environment and the VMware and the Hyper-V people don't like to talk to each other, well, you can do that as well. And you can have the reports just look at Hyper-V or just look at VMware. And then our management packs are just giant sets of data collection rules. We talk to vCenter, we talk to your Hyper-V host, we write all that into the data warehouse, and then we'll let you run all these reports on it. Now, if you're interested in Hyper-V or VMware in Cloud Reporter, on the next slide we give you a little bit of information on how to contact us. If you'd like to actually try an evaluation version in your own environment, we're happy to hear from you. Write to us at sales@civision.com. If you want to be even friendlier, write to us at partners@civision.com. We've actually got online demos of both our flagship product, Live Maps, and also Cloud Reporter as well, available at our website, civision.com. Follow us at Twitter, visit our website. We actually have a lot of webinars coming up in the future, a lot of white papers on Hyper-V and other technologies as well. And if you follow us on Twitter, you get advance notice of those. And we've got a lot of esteemed Microsoft employees and MVPs, just like Simon, that are online to be doing webinars and white papers for us in the future. So, with that said, I think it's time to get into some of the questions. So the first question for Simon is going back to the mixed mode clustering. So running different versions of the host. What's the minimum OS level that you need to have for mixed modes?
This mixed mode cluster, this is going to be a new technology introduced from this point on moving forward. And so this means that you're going to be able to have 2012 R2 plus vNext. In our next version, it's going to be vNext plus 1 plus vNext. So we're basically only going to allow you to do it between the current version and the next version.
Okay. Then we've got a couple questions around storage spaces. So the first one has the performance of storage spaces improved compared to 2012 R2.
Yes, it has. As you know, performance is something that we're constantly evaluating. You know, when we first release the product, we try to work with our hardware vendors as much as possible. But in many cases, we're still not at the point where we're getting that real-world feedback about how customers are using these technologies in different scenarios. So since our first release, the 2012 R2, and now our third release of storage spaces, we continue to make enhancements based on what our customers are doing, based on the latest storage enhancements as well. So yes, certainly something that we have found to be important. We've heavily invested in, so you should see a lot of performance improvements in this release. We have not yet actually finished the product, so it's too early for us to actually give a specific number and say, you know, we're 20% faster, because we're still continuing to improve performance as we work, you know, and continue to develop for this release.
Okay, another storage space questions. For storage spaces without shared storage, does the storage footprint on each cluster node need to be identical, or can you have different disk layouts on each host?
The way that we do replication is at the volume level. So what you would do with this direct-attached storage-only cluster is you would have to have 3 volumes that are the same. Now, the underlying disk, we don't care, right? It could be, you know, a 30 terabyte disk, a 20 terabyte, a 10 terabyte disk. But what we really require for the cluster piece is to ensure that the volume is the same. And so whatever volume you pick within that disk, as long as they're consistent across all three, that will be supported for this, this DAS-only cluster.
Okay. Then I've got a question about the new networking virtualization. So you talked a bit about whole software-defined networking, and we don't need our physical hardware anymore. Is there room for the people who produce the physical hardware to come in and integrate new software-based solutions into your network control layer?
Absolutely. Great question. You know, we have so many customers today that have already invested with these great networking vendors. And, you know, it's not just like that networking equipment. It's also things to ensure that the network stays performant, you know, ingress and egress monitoring, port mirroring, port forwarding. We want to make sure that we still integrate thoroughly with all of our partners. So absolutely. What we've done is we provided an extensible platform, both within the core network controller within Windows Server, and then also with the advanced management using System Center, where our network hardware partners, they can go plug in so that we can use that network controller role and still deploy their load balancers or their firewalls. And likewise, through Virtual Machine Manager, they plug into that. We could go and create these distributed services. We can go manage the networks, regardless of whether it's a Microsoft technology or a third-party technology. So absolutely, we have been working closely with our networking ecosystem on that.
Okay. And I've got another, hopefully not too tough one to throw at you. The new file format for virtual machines, where you're now encrypting this file format. Apparently people did have use cases to manually edit it. So have you looked at those use cases and given them new APIs through PowerShell perhaps or VMM to accomplish what they were trying to do with the manual editing?
Great question. What we have done is we still provide full support through all of our different APIs to go edit that. So this means you could connect directly through APIs. You could use WMI. You could use PowerShell. You could use Hyper-V Manager, Failover Cluster Manager, or SCVMM. Any of those options you can go and use to go and make an adjustment to a VM or the VM's configuration file. What we have still prevented is from somebody just to open up something like Notepad and make the change in Notepad. And again, the reason why we had to lock this down was because when people were making those changes and that virtual machine failed over to a different node or it live migrated, many times those changes were not copied. And so the virtual machine wouldn't work and they would actually lose high availability. So kind of to answer the question, we're not going to give you the easy way just directly add it in that text file still, but we still open up all of our different programmatic interfaces to give you that kind of same capability. So instead of, you know, having a script that directly edits the text file, your script would instead call WMI or it would call PowerShell or it would call one of those other interfaces to make that same change.
Okay. Question about WinRM. So Hyper-V hosts and Virtual Machine Manager make queries through WinRM. Have there been any performance improvements there?
Actually, the specific slide that I had earlier where we talked about different ways to go and actually connect to the virtual machines, that's actually where the big investment has been made. Hyper-V Manager now uses WinRM behind the scenes. So this means that it's faster, it's more performant, and gives you different options to connect. I'll be honest, performance tends to be one of the things that we get to last during our development cycle. So we're still working out a lot of the intricacies. So, you know, similar to the other question about performance improvement with storage, I can't give you any specific numbers yet about how much faster it is, how much better it is. That's still kind of in progress. But yeah, this definitely being one of the key investment areas. And you're going to notice that once you start to use the new Hyper-V Manager about how much quicker it is to turn on VMs, connect to them, start them up, things like that.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the questions. So I'd like to thank again Symon very, very much for leading this webinar for us today and telling us all about what's coming in next in Hyper-V. I'd like to thank all of the attendees for staying for this presentation. I hope you learned a lot from it. I know I definitely did. And again, invite you to visit us at civision.com or visit us on Twitter, twitter.com/civision. We have a lot of resources, white papers again as well on Hyper-V and the various things that you can do with it. And Thank you again. Hope you have all have a great day.
Thanks everybody for joining.